Hello, welcome to October. The first book I read in October is Curse of the Blue Tattoo by L.A. Meyer, the second book of the Bloody Jack Adventures. As I've mentioned previously, I'm not really going to talk about these books in these videos except to acknowledge that I'm reading them. And if you care to watch it, I am going to make reading vlogs about them. So, genuinely, probably will have put up the one for the first two books by the time this video gets put up, because it'll be like in November, so why wouldn't I have? But anyway, yeah, first book I read this month. Woohoo! I liked it. It's great. "2 Years Before the Mast" by Richard Henry Dana. I have finished it. This is a non-fiction memoir about Dana's time as a sailor. Basically in 1834, I think. Yes, 1834. He wanted to leave Harvard for a little while because he keeps saying there was something wrong with his eyes. I don't really know what he means by that. But I guess basically he was unable to spend a lot of time studying and staring at books all the time, so he was like, I'm going to go do something else for a little while and then come back. And he decided to sign up to be a sailor for 2 years on a ship called the Pilgrim. And he was in Boston, of course, because Harvard, and the ship was going to go to California, which was harder back then, of course, because you had to go all the way down around South America and Cape Horn, and that's unpleasant and nasty and far. And then it was going anyway, the ship was going to go to California and sail up and down the coast getting collecting hides, which would eventually be then taken back around to Boston again. And so that's what the book's about. It's actually, I don't know that it's super well known now, but at the time was very widely read. Everyone just got super excited about the concept, I guess. It's pretty good. I enjoyed it. My dad read it a couple years ago and hasn't been able to shut up about it since. I didn't think it was like that great, but you know, it was interesting, learning what it was like to be a sailor, and also just the picture of the California coast before the gold rush. So basically, very few people living there. San Francisco, nobody was living there. Well, not nobody, there was like one person, but there was like a presidio there, and there were some missions, but the city of San Francisco did not exist at all. And he talks about other places like Monterey, he talks about San Diego, Santa Barbara. He mentions Los Angeles. And then at the very end of the book, there is a 25 years later bit that he wrote for a later edition, because people were curious to hear the differences, like specifically because he decided to travel around the world, and I would love to hear that. But he just kept teasing me, oh, I saw all this other stuff, but I'm not going to tell you about it because the whole point of this is just to write a comparison of what California is like now versus what it was 25 years ago. And I'm like, stop teasing me with your adventures that you're not going to tell me about, you asshole. But anyway, and by that point, 100,000 people were living in San Francisco, so it's like a real city. And I was like, what the fuck? So, very fast change. So that was cool too. I didn't actually realize that that was included in this, but it was. A nice surprise. But I did have a good time. Feel like I learned a lot. I liked all the bits where he would just kind of go off on how unfairly sailors are treated, and how they have no recourse legally to deal with a bad captain or just generally anything unfair that might happen to them, especially when they're, halfway around the world, so far away from home, in a place where, in a situation where if they try to take the ship from the captain, it's a mutiny, and if they succeed and they don't go home where they would be punished, then they're pirates. So there's nothing they can do, and they can't exactly leave the ship and hang out in California. I mean, they could, but not a lot of people lived there, like I said. And it was part of Mexico at that point. And, like, you know, not really an option. So, I don't, it was, I mean, especially if you ever wanted to see your family again or whatever. So I enjoyed it. I did. I'm glad I read it. It was interesting, and I think that's good enough. Yeah, it's a memoir which became an American classic. Yeah, but he sounds like he was an interesting person. I wish he would have talked more about what he ended up doing after being a sailor, but he was really just focusing in that last bit on what California was like later. Though he did become a lawyer, I know that much, so. And like one of his causes was seamen, and just honestly being a sailor sounds like an awful job at that time, especially, like just just terrible, completely terrible, and very difficult, and you're constantly at the mercy of the people in charge, because you're on a ship, in the ocean. There's nowhere for you to go. If you have problems with them, you can't quit, and you don't get your money until you get back home, so, like, it sucks. But, anyway, it was interesting to learn about, so, yeah. I don't know. I have finished Ball Lightning by Cixin Liu. I didn't really like it. And I feel bad. And also stupid. So, Cixin Liu wrote The Three-Body Problem and sequels. And I loved those books so much. I, was completely blown away by them. And so, when I saw last year that the library had a new book by him, I was super excited to read it, even though I wasn't that interested in the premise, which is that this guy's parents die by a blast of ball lightning, and he decides to devote his life to studying it, and then he meets some strange people, and, I don't know, some soldiers and scientists, and discovers what ball lightning really is, or whatever. Okay. And then, of course, I took a year before I actually picked the fucking thing up and read it, but whatever. Now, also, I think it's worth mentioning, it's not that this is a new book, it's just that it was translated into English last year. Okay. The thing I liked about it was a thing which the Three-Body Trilogy also has, which is, like, the science madness was really interesting. Like, basically, he's just like, ball lightning. Let's just wildly speculate about what it could be. And this physicist discovers that ball lightning is sort of a macro electron, is what they start going into. And that has some interesting implications vis-a-vis quantum states, quantum superposition, I don't know. Anyway, I was reading some of those bits, like, giggling to myself, like, I could use, like, let's use this information to write the least interesting, but possibly nerdiest Quantum Leap fanfiction. That's not what this is about. Okay. So I liked that, and that was honestly my favorite thing about the Three-Body Trilogy, was all the really, really hard science. Like, honestly, the characters will just go on lectures about how just kind of Cixin Liu has gone, here's a thing, now let's just extrapolate it to this crazy, like, endpoint. I was in love with that stuff, but I think, like, I never cared that much about the characters in those books, but I think what helped was that the stakes were so high in that trilogy, and also it was about one of my favorite things, which is Alien First Contact, and, like, just somehow the stars aligned for me to really love that trilogy, and just this book, it just didn't happen. I don't know. Like, the main character I didn't find terribly interesting at all. So, like, my favorite character was the military officer, Lin Yun, who is, like, obsessed with weapons. so I liked her, or at least I thought she was interesting. I didn't think Dr. Chen, main character guy, was interesting. I thought it, I mean, oh my god. And then, like, the last third of this book, the physicist Ding Yi is just like, hey, Dr. Chen, I'm going to explain to you all of this stuff that happened after you left the Institute. It's like, why is he even the main character? Like, what does Chen fucking contribute? I don't know. Like, some mathematical modeling that doesn't end up being terribly important? I don't know. I don't think he was the best choice of main character, although it would be more difficult to write the story from Lin Yun's perspective, considering what happens in the end, but, like, whatever. Could work around it. There were parts of it that I liked. There were ideas that I liked, but, like, I found it just kind of a slog to get through because I didn't care that much about where it was going. Maybe that's the other thing. I mean, if you have... Like, the thing with the three-body trilogy, too, is that, like, there is... I mean, very basically what it's about is humanity finds out that some aliens are coming to Earth, but it's going to take them a long-ass time to get here, and then there's, like, several thousand years of how humanity, like, evolves with that knowledge and reacts to it. Like, that's pretty basic what the trilogy is. So there's, like, an end point that it's moving towards. In this one, it was less clear. Like, I didn't, you didn't know where it was going, which is fine for some things, but in this case, it was just like, where, I don't care. Like, okay, they're studying ball lightning. I don't know. And then I thought it was really weird how there's this war that takes place, and, like, he wouldn't tell us who they were fighting. Like, I'm pretty sure it was the United States, but I don't understand why the book couldn't just, like, make that 100% clear. But they would always be like, the enemy. But then they gave the names of some of their ships, and one of them, and they were, like, clearly U.S. ships, or, like, aircraft carriers or whatever, and I was like, what? Why don't you just say that you're fighting the United States? Like, no one cares. But, okay. And considering just everything that China as a country has been doing, especially recently, it's like, oh god, it's just, it's an added layer of making this book harder to get through. I mean, especially because the book focuses on the military and the military, like, studying this stuff as a potential weapon. It was, I don't know, it was interesting, but it just wasn't, like, enough to make me really want to read it, and so it took a while, and so I'm kind of just, like, glad I'm done. Which is sad, but I honestly don't know what else he's written, because, I mean, this book's like 13, 14 years old. So, and I also don't know when the Three-Body Trilogy was actually written, I just know when it was more recently published in English. So, like, I don't know if he's written anything since then that I might find, that I might like more if it gets translated. I don't know. But, I can only hope, because, like, I really like the Three-Body Trilogy. I'm sorry this entire video is just me being like, the Three-Body Trilogy was so good, y'all. But I will say, okay, it is, like, such an acquired taste. I think that, it's very hard sci-fi. It's not focused on character. I mean, it does have some characters, I guess, but, like, it's mostly focused on events, and it's just very depressing. Like, its view of humanity, it's just kind of like humanity is irredeemable, and you're like, Jesus Christ! Like, it's very depressing. And I loved it, but I, certainly wouldn't want every book to be like that. Obviously, goes without saying. I just think, like, I do see a few booktubers who have the Three-Body Problem as a book that they want to read at some point. And I'm always thinking, like, I think it might be a kind of a hard book to love for a lot of people. But I don't know. I loved it. But anyway, I did not love Ball Lightning, which sucks. I wanted to. But, hopefully he writes something else, that it gets translated in English, and I do love it. But, until then. I finished Persepolis Rising. It's so big. It's so big. Okay. It's like not that much bigger than the other ones. I loved it. Alright, so this is book 7 of The Expanse, which means I only have one left. Desperately hoping that they do publish a book 9 at least. Like, I would be happy if these guys were just like, we're gonna write The Expanse till the end of time. I'd be like, yeah, fucking give it to me. I don't even care. I'll keep reading it. But anyway, really liked this book. So, this is a little bit of a spoiler, but, you know, I don't leave those out. I like to talk about the books, so. Spoiler, but it's a spoiler for the basic premise of this book, so, like, it's not a huge one, I guess, in that sense. Anyway, this one is set 30 years after book 6. So 30 years after Babylon's Ashes. And you find that out on, like, page 1, and I was like, what the fuck? But basically it's just to give enough time for the transport union to kind of become a thing, and the transport union basically controls movement through the gates. And for, like, these colonies to become more established, and specifically for Laconia to have 30 years to really continue to study. Well, okay, so it turns out, I don't remember if we knew this or not, but Duarte, who ran off with a bunch of the Martian Navy, or the Martian Marines or whatever, the Martian Navy, yeah, to Laconia he had some protomolecule with him, like, he stole that little bit, and has been spending these last 30 odd years studying it, and he's been doing some fucked up shit. Let me just tell you. But, he's a bit of a wannabe god emperor, and he might pull it off. That's what makes him scary. And okay, so then the basic plot of the book is that a ship from Laconia finally comes through the gate, takes over Medina, and proceeds to work towards taking over basically every place that humans have now colonized, or, you know, Earth or Mars or whatever, where they're originally from. And it's just a bad time. And meanwhile, our heroes on the Rocinante are all 30 years older, but they're all still there. And I'm just, like, cry, because they're a little family, and, like, I don't know, I just love it. Serious Firefly vibes, but, like, if Firefly was very different. But it's still a smallish ship, a small crew, and their family. But also, they've been together for, like, 40 years. And, it's really good. Specific to this book, I really liked the character Singh. He's the bad guy, basically, who was sent to be the governor of Medina from Laconia. And he just keeps making mistakes. And you just, like, kind of, you, on the one hand, feel sorry for him because he's a bit pathetic. But on the other hand, you're like, wow, you're horrifying. But it's really interesting to be inside his mind, because he's been brought up on Laconia since he was, like, 10 or something, maybe even younger. And just, like, is so seeped in this mindset of authoritarian, like, Duarte is the high consul, and everything has to be, like, done according to this very specific plan of what they're going to be accomplishing so that they can take over the galaxy. And I know, but, like, Duarte has, like, long-term plans. It's special. But Singh's chapters were great. It's just, like, really good. It's really good. I think my favorite, I'm dropping stuff. I think my favorite chapter, honestly, was the one Amos chapter, because I just like every time we get a glimpse inside his head, and just kind of, like, some stuff is happening in this book, that is affected, like, it's just, like, basically Amos is upset about something, and it's, like, it's interesting, because Amos doesn't usually do reactions to things happening. But no, I really liked his chapter. It was really interesting. And I like the dynamic that he and Bobby are falling into. Like, basically, well, okay, after that chapter, she beats the crap out of him, which is what he wanted. It's interesting, because it's just, like, it's like it resets his brain, and he's like, okay, I'm fine now. And it's like, It's like, on the one hand, you probably need help, but you probably needed help, like, 50 years ago. But also, like, it makes sense, and it's really interesting. But anyway, so after that, it's kind of like, because part of the conflict as well is that, Naomi and Holden decide to retire, and they give the ship to Bobby. So Bobby's the captain, but then immediately the Laconians attack, so, like, they don't even get a chance to go off to their retirement, and everybody's kind of together again. And it's a bit awkward, because it's like, okay, well, Holden's in charge again, and Bobby's like, a bit. But it seems to have shook itself out to something making more sense by the end. And yeah, and it left us on, like, a really major, not revelation exactly, but just, like, a glimpse into Duarte's plans. And you're like, can he pull this off? Will Holden help him? I think that's the question, because there's, well, as the book says, an old enemy returns, and you spend the whole book thinking it's Duarte, and, like, it kind of is, but it's also something else. Dun dun dun. Anyway, I loved it. I am dying to read the next one. I don't know when I'm going to, as usual, but I know the library has it. Just, there's a couple books I want to read first. Like, I'm not gonna go looking for it immediately, but it was really excellent, in summary.